Hello guys, welcome to the fourth video of the Python database project with a Ktinker GUI. In this video I want to go over some changes I've made to the project. For starters, I've added a few more variables, so instead of just 3 variables and the table ID to store the index of the tables, I have created 7 variables including an address, the city, state, and zip code. And in case you guys haven't noticed, I've also created a GUI script using Ktinker, which I will go over in the second part of this video. The first part, let me go over the changes to the main.py. So apart from creating 4 new variables for the table, I've changed the create database function. So now it takes all the new 4 items and saves them as a text item for our table, except for the zip code, which is an integer. And well, this is the only thing I've changed for create database. Show table and query are now a little bit different, and for the 4 items in item, it prints all 8 items. Well, technically it's supposed to be 7. I don't know why it's 8 over here, because it starts at 0 and goes to 7, so that's the 8 items. I guess I forgot to change that correctly. The update and insert functions now take all 8 variables. Well, the update function takes 8 variables, the insert function takes 7 and calculates the order ID on its own. So it saves all 8 items as global, well, 7 of them. The order ID is still calculated. Not calculated, sorry, it's inserted. And then, yeah, just like in the last video, the c.execute will assign the new inputs that we place into the function as the official items in the table. So the first name is set to a variable called first, and that first variable is the underscore first name, which itself is the first name that we get from the input argument. And the same applies for the last name, email, address, city, state, zip code, and the order is just straight up just imported from the inserted argument. That just tells the c.execute which table we're editing, or which table we're creating changes in. Let me just scroll down very carefully so that you guys can see the code. And once this entire project is over, I'm going to post all the code on the GitHub page and link it online in the description box, so you guys can just copy the code from there, and if you want to use it on your own time. The insert function now has 7 arguments. The only thing it calculates is the table ID, which is done over here. I think I went over this in the last video. And the parameters take in the 7 arguments, and then they insert it into the table using the 8 question marks, because it also takes in the table ID with parameters being inserted into each question mark by order of input. Show query has been changed a bit. It is now separate from the show table function. It basically takes the items as c.fetchAll, then it creates a variable called print items. Then for item and items, print items, our variable, gets added in each item. So rather than printing it out, it's added into the print items variable. So it goes from string item all the way till item 7. Sorry, not string item. String item 0 all the way till string item 7. So all 8 arguments in all 8 parts of the table are being inserted into print items. They're being inputted as strings, and between them there's going to be a comma, so that way we can separate each of the items. And then just for debugging purposes, it's also going to print it on the terminal down below. And this is a return function, so once print item has all the items for the table stored inside, it's going to return it, and then in the GUI function it's going to query it on our GUI that I've created. I'm going to show you that in a bit. and delete is basically the same. Now I have commented out all the lines of code, even the create database. All the lines of code are no longer called from the main.py, which does seem counterintuitive. I'm going to change this later. Later I'm going to change it so that both the GUI script and the database script, which all of these functions are going to go into the database script, which will be its own separate script, can be called from the main.py, and the main.py will manage and invoke each of those scripts and codes and functions that it needs to. But for the time being, I'm going to call them all from GUI. And in GUI it creates the database and it runs root.main loop. Now I have not gone over how Ktinker works, but root.main loop is basically how you call a Ktinker GUI file. Basically, in order to run Ktinker, you need a few things. One, you need a root object, assign it tk with parentheses. But before all that, you have to import Ktinker. And this I'm going to import. I've imported this for something I'm going to do later on. Well, it's already here because I'm going to be using this for managing icons, which is another thing. I've created an images folder and placed an icon that I found online. That's going to be the icon on the top left corner, kind of like how the Microsoft Visual Code has the Microsoft Visual Code icon on the top left. And that icon is the root.icon bitmap, which points to our images folder and then the name of the icon inside. Root.geometry, this is how many pixels wide and high the GUI is going to be. Root.title is the title, just like how in Visual Studio Code it says the name of our file, project name, Visual Studio Code. For our GUI, it's just going to say Python SQLite3 Ktinker project. And a lot of this code, I'm not gonna lie, it's not original. I found a few sources online. I was able to take inspiration and then a little bit of copy paste, but I have made some changes, such as added my own email entry and grid. Basically, an entry is a built-in function. It's a built-in block of code for Ktinker. So whatever is assigned entry is basically the user input, and the width is the shape of the user input box. I'm going to show you this, what this looks like in a bit. And then now that's been assigned to a variable fname. Fname.grid tells Ktinker where in our GUI to place the entry box that I have created. And I've done that for last name, first name, email, address, city, state, zip code, and then there's also a delete box with the delete function. So on our GUI, it's going to check for all of these. Actually, let me just run it and show you. So here is what the Ktinker GUI looks like. So on the top left, we have our icon, the title, that's Python SQLite Ktinker project. The minimize, maximize, and close are built into Ktinker, so these are called from ktinker.root. Same for the color scheme. I haven't chosen a theme yet or the colors. I'm going to do that in the future video. Now, let me just close this. Because I ran the GUI script and create database was a line that's printed in here, our first database has been created. And unlike the previous databases, this one accounts for all 8 objects rather than just the 3. And the reason I'm able to call in a function from the main.py, the create database table function, through my GUI.py script is because of this line. From main, import everything. Main being the main.py, which is in the same folder as the GUI.py script. Import all the functions. Now the functions that are imported, I can call them in the GUI script natively. And alright, before I move forward, so these are the entry boxes for the inputs. basically these are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These 7 boxes, and also the select ID, which is the delete box. These entry boxes. This is what it is. This entry root width 30. The width 30 is the number of pixels. This is how long this is horizontally. And then here we created a text box label. So on the left where it says first name, last name, these are the labels. So these are using the label class, and then the grid assigns their position, which is to the left of the entry boxes. So that's where all the create text box labels are. Now I've created a few functions. Add to record basically takes the inputs, first name, last name, email, etc., and it gets the inputs, the user input, using the .get function, and then it assigns them to variables first name, last name, email. Then I am calling the insert function, this insert function right here that I've created, which takes in 7 arguments. Now I'm inputting these arguments that I've created from the user input into the insert function. And then I'm clearing the entry boxes so you know there's no text left over. This basically calls the insert function and adds a table to the database. I'm gonna show you this when I run the code. Actually, let me show you what this does right now. So add to record. So first name, let's go anonymous. Penguin for last name. Email, just a made up email. Address, 123 Street Road. It's a made up address. City. State. I'm not very creative, guys, I'm sorry. Zip code 12345. Now when I click show records, it shows nothing, because right now the database has been created, but there are no tables inside. But when I click add record to database, these are now empty because of the clear boxes function. But when I click show records, it shows it down here in our GUI. Our order ID is 1, first name anonymous, last name penguin, email, address, city, state, zip code, and it also outputs it in the terminal. This is because of the query function. Output equals show query, which I believe is what I now, yeah. So this is the same as the query function. I just went over this. It saves it to print items and then it returns print items. So output is the return. The print items that's returned is outputted to this variable. And then I've created a label and assigned it a grid location right here. And this is where it outputs it. But because I'm also printing print items, it outputs it down here in the terminal as well. So this is how the insert and query functions work right now. But let me show you how the delete function, well, the delete function works the same way. I just have to put in the order ID, which in this case is 1. So if I put in order ID 1 and delete record, and now click show records, it's empty. Actually, when I click show records, it's showing nothing in the terminal. So the record is empty now. But I have not updated the delete function to clean this out. I'm gonna have to do this later in the next video. But when I run the code again, hang on, there's an error. Okay, here we go. And now I click show records, it's empty because I deleted 1. So let me show you how the delete function works in this. For that, I've created a function called remove. So the removal number, which is the order ID, is found from the delete box.get. So the delete box is the select ID's entry box. So whatever I put in a number, the number is get from the entry box and stored into removal number. And then it calls the delete function from the main.py script that I've created right here. And in the argument for the delete, it puts the removal number, and then it empties the entry box. So that's how the delete function works. The same as it does in the last video. And if you're wondering how the buttons on the GUI know what functions to call, here's the button scripts. So for the submit button, this is the add to record database button, which is submit. I use the button class. It calls root, which is the... I'm sorry for that, guys. One of my neighbors has their radio on very loud. I'm really sorry, but I'm just gonna power through this. So yeah, the add to record button. The name add to record database is in the text. Add to record to database. And then the command is the add to record function. This add to record function is right here on line 50, which itself calls the insert function at line 60 from the main.py. So that's how this works, the add to record database. The query button has the show records. So that is the show records button, and it basically calls the command query for the query function, which is right here at line 72, which itself calls the show query function from main.py show query. So that's how the query button knows how to output the information in our database. The delete record calls the remove function, text delete record, the button, the root, and the grid has its location. Sorry if I'm being very general on this. I really don't feel like going over Ktinker in its entirety, but in the description box below I will have a link to a website that has all the documentation for Ktinker. So if you want to read this on your own, you can. Honestly, the best way to learn code is by practice. It's like learning how to ride a bike. You just have to do it until it clicks in your brain how coding works. But anyway, it calls the remove function. Here's the remove function, which itself calls the delete function in main.py. Now if you're wondering why I don't just call the main.py functions, that's because they have arguments, and you can't put arguments in the command slot for the buttons. Like I can't put remove and the arguments in the remove function. I can only put the name of the function remove, which is why I had to create these functions like remove, query, which are separate functions from the main.py. However, they also serve a second function, which is to insert into the main.py functions the inputs from the user. So these are still GUI functions because they deal with the entry boxes in the GUI, the graphical user interface, and then place them into the functions from the main.py. So they're still related to the graphical user interface. So it's better to have separate functions for these. I know it's kind of counterintuitive creating a function for a function, but as far as code organization goes, this is actually very important because it keeps all the core functionality right now in the main.py, whereas everything that's graphics related is in a GUI function. I mean a GUI script, which is a separate script. So it helps keep this clean, easy to organize, which for future upgrades and modularity it's going to be very useful. Now the last button is the update button. This calls the update function, which allows us to change a table, and it calls the modify function, which in itself creates a second graphical user interface, which allows us to modify our table. This again calls the same icon from images, but it has a different title and a different size. It has different variables which have been set global, so they can be called outside this function. They have their own entry boxes, their own labels, their own delete. Well, it's not a delete, it's a... This is how we can find which table to modify, but I copied and pasted the delete box, so I'm going to have to change this variable in the next video. And then it has the save button, which is just like the update button here, but the save button here actually does the updating, and it calls the modifier function, which is down here. And the modifier function is the one that calls the update function. And all the arguments from the update function are from the entries within the modifier function, these global entries. And apart from that, it destroys the second widget for the update. Let me show you by example what that looks like. Oh, it's already running. Alright, if I click show records, right now the record is empty. So let's say random boy email road street city is town, state is country, just random inputs. Zip code is 98765. Add this to their database. Now when I click show records, we have one record. So now let's edit this record. I click the edit record button. And now we have a separate graphical user interface. So now let's select the order ID that we want to modify. This will be 1 because there's only 1 in it so far. Now let's change this to new guy ng@gmail.com. Address is 123 Street Road. City is city. State is state. And zip code is 56789. And when I click save record, we go back to our original graphical user interface. But now when I click show records, it's changed. It is now our table at order 1 at location 1 is now new guy at gmail.com. It basically modified randomboy@gmail and everything. Basically this allows us to modify the old listing into a new listing. Now let's add a second item. Second guy sg@yahoo.com. Random address, random city, random state, random numbers for the zip code. Add record to database. Now when I show records, we now have the first record still saved in our table, but we now have a second one as well. And it shows here. It's kind of glitched out on the GUI how it shows it. I'm going to have to modify this in the next video. But let's say we want to delete the first one. We click delete. Now show records. There's only item number 2 in our database now. And if I want to modify item number 2, edit records, I have to type in 2 because even though there's one item in the database, it's still on the second row. So I have to identify it by row, which is its order ID. Now this will be 2 man tm@gmail.com. Address would be edit road, one edit road. City would be city, state is state, zip code is 36344. Save record. Now when I show records, our second row is now changed. So instead of second guy, it's now to man, tm@gmail.com, and now it has the new information. So the edit record does work. It works for whichever ID I selected on, whichever location the table is on, it can work. So yeah, this is all I wanted to show you guys. It's a bit buggy here and there. I'm still gonna have to, I mean, this is far from completed. I just wanted to show you guys, give you guys an update on what I've been doing so far. And yeah, the code isn't posted yet for this, but once the entire project is completed, I will post the code in the description box. For the time being, you guys are gonna have to be satisfied with the documentation for Ktinker if you want to learn how to create your own graphical user interfaces. Right now, I just wanted to give an example of how this works. Anyways, this is all I wanted to go over. I hope you guys have a good one, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.